joining with us here today Allanna, Kelsall and Anita Cavanough. So we are very privileged to have them to share their knowledge and expertise with us here today. I'm very, very glad to be hearing their stories. Allanna is, as you see, Chief Human Resource Officer, so she has a lot of knowledge in that space, and Anita with Mindful People, and many of you who've already been attending other webinars may have heard from Anita before and know already some of the knowledge that she's shared for us. So we're very grateful for her for the previous and then now the present webinar that she's on. What we are looking to address here today is setting the stage with strong female leaders. We are wanting to address the double standards, the stereotypes and the risks that we need to really tackle, but with more diplomacy than what a front row might. And we want to create a support network to champion each other and build alliances for improved positioning. And we want to address that sometimes those alliances may come from surprising places. So we really need to keep our eyes open as to who those allies are and to know that they are on our side. And with setting the stage with strong female leaders, presently we're still looking at a minority. We are growing. It is great that we are seeing more women in that space, but we want to make it that it isn't the minority, because the research is showing that innovations and the value of having women in those roles, the diversity, that changes, that benefit changes when there is more of an equal measure. When it is still the minority, the benefits aren't as felt as when it actually becomes that it's a standard rather than the exception to the rule. So that's what we're wanting to do here, is really create pathways for that to continue to grow in how many women are on that stage and how many role models we have to aspire towards and how many have already walked the path before us. So that's why it's so important to have Anita and Allanna here today, because they definitely have that experience to be able to talk from. So challenging the status quo. As we mentioned, there are things that we can do that are handling it in a diplomatic way, and there's things that we can do that may be quite challenging. And obviously this piece is just a humorous piece. I'm not expecting anybody to genuinely put on a fake mustache, but it is. You'll do it.
I had it ready.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not ashamed. But it's part of what you said at the last one for Fridays, Dress Up Friday.
Right? Yeah, innovation, huh? Yeah.
So yeah, we're wanting to look at ways that we can address in a way that is non-threatening, in a way that is collaborative, in a way that is really presenting ideas. And I think that Peter Keith is not a guest with us here today, but he speaks about the artful use of questions. So having artful questions is a way that we can approach a conversation with curiosity rather than in a space of conclusion. So when we have that curiosity, if we can be looking at not just, I think, Anita, yesterday we were talking about as well, not just what we're wanting to achieve, but why we want to achieve it, and not being focused and stuck on how we're going to achieve it. Have that flexibility with what we are asking and how we're going to achieve that.
Yeah, constant reassessment is important, and that flexibility piece, Sam. Yeah, perfectly said.
So now we are stepping more into the real meat of the conversation. So we have the challenges that are faced, and this is where I'd really like to hear more from Anita and Allanna on their personal stories as how they have faced these specific 5 points that many others on the call, I believe, would have experienced or are preparing to experience themselves, and want to have some example stories on how they could maybe go through that process. So the double standards piece, and I mentioned as we very first came into this, when there's an individual in a minority group, there can be a perceived risk of higher risk, perception of higher risk, and there can be also a mindset of scarcity. Because you're from a minority, you feel like there is less opportunity for you. And so it's important to realize that although there is risk, there is opportunity in risk. And the very fact that you are part of a minority means you could think differently and present quality ideas that have not occurred to others. So innovation is really paramount in business at present. We've moved from the information economy over to the creative economy, which is where innovation is very useful. And statistically, more women are right-brained than men. So this provides an environment ripe for women to have that opportunity and express those creative and qualitative ideas. That may be a risk to present some new ideas, and we have, Anita, spoken on this before. How do we present ideas? So I'd like to hear from both of you as to a time when you maybe had a foreign concept that others hadn't considered before and how you presented that concept. So who wants to go first with that one?
I'm happy to, I suppose. I found myself in a situation once where I was offered an exceptional promotion, one which I had my heart set on. So I was over the moon when that became a reality. I was working for Virgin Australia Airlines, so loved the brand and felt very passionate about, as I said, stepping up into this new challenge. It was a national role, full-time, one that required travel, working within a great team, launching cargo at the time. My personal situation at that time was that I was a single parent and I had two little girls. So one was in kindergarten and one was starting prep. So as all the parents out there can imagine, it was a very, very busy little time and an important one. Dove straight in, took the promotion, took the role on, and leaned on my support networks for a portion of time to be able to collect the children, etc., while I focused on this role. But my focus was proving my worth, proving that I was exceptionally outcome focused and driven, and knowing my job inside out. So right down to KPIs, but also, you know, soft skills required, and making sure that I just hit that out of the ballpark and that was really evident for key stakeholders, so my direct manager and group executive. The reason for that, as well as just doing a great job in general and feeling good about that, was so that I could put a justification piece to my leader and to the business for flexible working arrangements. So I desired to finish at 2 o'clock in the office so that I could pick my little girls up because they mean a lot to me, and then continue to work from home from say 3 through till 6 or 7 p.m, whatever was required, because it was outcome focused, as I said. It had never been done before in the business. So it was a brand new concept. It was one which I knew would face potential pushback from many levels. So what I did was I sat down and I thought about, you know, what matters to me. What matters to me is being successful in my role, doing a great job, supporting my teammates, but also being a great mum and not having my children in, you know, continuous after school care. And that was important to me, and I was really comfortable with that. So it was quite easy to put that justification piece together and, you know, be honest about that. I went and sat with my GM, who I reported to, and sought his support, and he was wonderful about it, which I'm lucky about. I know that a lot of you out there don't have potentially such supportive managers. I've certainly been in that space before, but stand strong with what you believe in would be my advice. So I had his support and I got that approved, and that was all well and good. So great to pick the girls up, but then that added extra stress of trying to manage, you know, working from home in the afternoons and into the evening, but we got into a good rhythm. Now, I think the one, and I'll try to be brief, Sam, but the important thing to mention here is that whilst it was great that I'd gotten that over the line, there was a lot of negativity received from a few colleagues within the team who saw me leaving at 2 o'clock. So to them, perception was, oh, off she goes for the day and we're here until 5 or 5:30 p.m. And that just wasn't the case. For me, it was, you know, how quickly can I cut it fine just to the minute before I've got to get to the school gate, so that then my children aren't stressed when they come out if I'm not there. Home I get, I've got a phone hook up this afternoon, then a national meeting with Perth and da-da-da. So the reality of it was very different from what these people's perception was. But it took me probably a few weeks to settle into understanding that the most important thing was ensuring that those key stakeholders were very happy with my work. So consistently, every single week, meeting with my GM, meeting with the group executive, here's what I achieved last week. Are you comfortable? Are you happy with that? Is there anything that you feel that was missed? Let's have an open, honest conversation about it. Here's what's happening for the week ahead. So knowing that I had their support alleviated some of that stress or anxiety I felt from that received negativity, and it also taught me a lot of resilience. So yeah, and then after that, I think there was 3 or 4 other people within the business that soon followed suit. So it felt nice to do something, or to be the first at cracking that piece, so that others could benefit from it for them and their families too. So yes, sorry if that was a long story.
That's great. And I guess I see a lot of similarities in some of the experiences that I've had. I'm a bit longer in the tooth, I think. So I've had a lot more of the challenges to get through. And so I've been able to trial a whole host of different things. One of the things, I'm not a parent. And so as a female leader, early on in my career, I did the same thing as you, Anita, and it was work the long hours. And I used it to my advantage to say, I don't have the kids, I can go, I can do the travel, I can do all of these things. But I found that was at the expense of my own health and sanity, because I was working 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And it became expected because I didn't have a reason not to. And so some of the things that I had to just make some decisions around early in my career, I actually got a dog, so that there was a reason that I had to go home. There was something that I could cling to as a touchstone, so that I wasn't all encompassing in just one particular area. And so I think it's knowing yourself, that it doesn't have to be that it's a parent or whatever. It's about treating people how they want to be treated. And that's respect. And so it's understanding what are the individual needs of every person, including yourself, and how do you help prioritise those things for them. So something that I would do with people on my team around holiday periods, it was a win-win, that I would say, all right, you guys take the holidays now, so that you can have school holidays with your kids. I don't have that, I'll take mine some other time. So it was that ebb and flow back and forth to say, give where you can as well, as a female leader, that it's not about taking advantage of things. It's just about meeting people where they are and providing that balance for them in what their needs are, whether it's male, female, everybody, if we treat them how they want to be treated, that will go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you were saying just then, Allanna, about your own health and well-being, and focusing on that. And particularly when we're high achievers in the corporate world or any industry you work in, it is exceptionally easy to just let that slip, and then we're 3 months down the track and we've not done anything that brings us joy or, you know, shines a light on what we love most. So yeah, it's an important thing to be mindful of, definitely. Yeah. You're on mute, Sam, I think. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I had my daughter's change of class alarm going off. But I agree very much so with the point that you just spoke into there about your own health and looking after your own health. And I think actually you reflected it yourself, Anita, when you very first spoke into the change that you were asking for. While flexible working conditions was a new and unconventional idea, especially at the time, we're currently already going through work from home. That's been more of a forced experience. But when you were presenting it, it was a very new idea, and it wasn't something that people had experienced. But the other thing that we're looking at is, one of the words you said in specific was that you wanted to prove your worth in order to ask for that. And I think that's something that we are all very, very guilty of when we are linking our achievements to our worth, and we're wanting to actually show we deserve the requests that we're asking for. And that speaks really to what both of you were saying there. Allanna, you deserve to have time, you deserve a holiday, and you deserve to not have to take on 100 hours because we're trying to prove that. And I think that's a really important thing to look at there. And I think they're thank you both for sharing those stories, because they're very, very personal, and we are sharing personal things here. So I do really want to respect you for the fact that you've had the bravery to come and be vulnerable and share like that. Point two that we were looking at there was with the double, household parenting, double shifts, and even, we did a little bit just then talk on, it doesn't necessarily just be about parenting, but just household activities. And the assumed caretaker role within the workplace. There are many areas where women face a juggling act in prioritising their time, and the morning routine can be a case in point for how some things can take substantially more time than women. We actually joked on that just before, Anita, about our war paint for this session. And what are your strategies for this? So I've heard some other people speak on it, but managing those routines and the time that it takes that we need to invest in there.
I'll jump in, I suppose. Anything you can do to minimise stress or anxiety before you head off on a full-on day is good. I like to try to get even just a half-hour workout in the morning, whether it's Pilates or whatever it is, just so that I feel like before I've started my day I've done something for myself. Even if the entire rest of my day is focused on my workforce, on the business, on children, etc., that I've had that snapshot. So that sets me up for success right from the get-go. Because I do have small people to get organised as well, which is like herding cats. Don't know how many times I have to ask for shoes to be put on, but just put them on. I always try to get myself organised head to toe before it's action stations, basically, and making sure that lunches and things like that are done as well the night before. Freezing anything that can be frozen for a lunchbox makes my life a lot easier as well. I know that if I go 3 or 4 mornings without doing any exercise, then I'm not the most fun person to be around. Similar if that coffee doesn't arrive as soon as guilty. But just alleviating that stress or anxiety in the mornings. I think regardless of whether you've got children or not, the mornings are flat out. So
yeah. And Allanna, as Anita just referenced there, regardless and if you've got children or not, there still is additional time in getting ready, in all the other things that we need to do, and it's about the juggling act. So while you've got your household routines, and you've got also the getting our hair done and everything else that we've got to do that is differently, but we have other things that we need to juggle. I'm sure that there are other things on your plate that you have to also maintain that balance with. So how are some strategies that you take for yourself in order to have that juggling act, and like Anita mentioned, exercise, involving that well in your balance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have to have asked Tasman, my puppy, to put on his shoes multiple times. But aside from that, very similar things. So exercise for me, I know in my role that I just don't, if I plan to do it in the evening, it doesn't get done.
Neither.
Because your day stretches out, and then a wine seems so much more interesting than a jog around the park. And so it's that commitment to say, even if it's just, I have a neighbour that I now, we get up and do 30 minutes, because again, it's how to help, identify what your strengths and opportunities are. And one of my weaknesses is I'm more than happy to press that snooze button and have that extra half hour sleep, because it seems like it would do me more good than the exercise. And I've worked out that's not the case. And so having a buddy, somebody who helps hold you accountable for the things that you don't hold yourself accountable enough for, works well for me. So it is eating, I think, making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. And again, this is all my aspirations, I don't do it all the time. So I think it's that rule of just trying to do something 80% of the time. Just try and do it more frequently than you do it right now. Start small and just keep adding more bits in. And then fortunately I'm in a position that I have flexibility and I can adjust my own schedule. And so something that I'd worked out with my teams is I like to start at about 9 o'clock and I'll finish at about 6:30, and then come home and work. But there'll be others who want to come into the office at 7:30 and leave at 4:30. And so it's just about sort of finding that group dynamic to make sure that you've got coverage. And again, it's that individualisation of leadership to say, all right, together, let's get it covered. Don't treat everybody exactly the same.
I like what you were saying, Allanna, about it doesn't go that way every single day. That's one thing that I have a difficult time coming to terms with, is that I think, I might have had a poor night's sleep for whatever reason. And I know I want to get up at 5:30 and do a workout and stick to my routine because that's what works and I feel good. But hitting that snooze button is probably the best thing to do that day, and you need to not beat yourself up about it. So I think exactly as you said, just working on that kind of 80% rule and giving ourselves a bit of a break some days and being kind to ourselves is an important thing to remember. Yeah.
I do think we probably hold ourselves to a higher standard. And then oftentimes our self-talk is what is the worst offender. And so I liked I've heard a quote and it was, would you say it to a friend?
Oh, yes.
Yep. The thing that you're saying to yourself, would you say it to a friend? And you're like, absolutely you wouldn't. And so we've just got to be kinder to ourselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely like, same as what Anita said with the 80-20 rule, having that, again, that little bit of flexibility. We do need the consistency, but also the flexibility. You've both spoken on a point though, that it's about that guilt. So it's the self-talk, but it's also the guilt piece. And so when you say about the high standards that we hold ourselves to, if that self-talk is about really how much time are we investing in our guilt? How much time are we focusing on how guilty we feel about whether we press the snooze button, or how guilty we feel about asking for holidays, or how guilty we feel about whatever change needs to happen that may feel like a buck of the trend? And so both of those points, the 80-20 rule is also, I think, relevant, not just in our exercise routine, but even in our own workplaces. Where can we look at and consider, for 80% of the time, this is the rule, but situationally, this now needs to be the 20. And when we're asking for a change, maybe it is that 20.
Right, 100%.
So actually that goes probably into point 3, which is, becoming more than the exception to the rule. So that 20 that we just spoke on was the exception to the rule. So what I wanted to speak on here is the exposure from firsts and first steps. Baby's first steps, baby's first things, all those kind of things. First man on the moon, all the things. Our society is obsessed by firsts. And sometimes this added exposure can be the very thing that's stopping us from stepping up to the plate. We don't want the added attention and we just want to do our jobs. I love the way that you say, Allanna, that we remove the gender from it and just that we are human. You are a chief human resources officer. You're not a female chief human resources officer. It's not that I'm wanting to work for you because you're a female. It's that you are good at your job. And that's all we really want. We want to be recognized for being good at our job and earning the position that we are in. So I want to know, how have you managed the extra attention that you've received for being a woman in a high-powered role?
Yeah, so happy to start on that one. So early on, so I was very fortunate. I lived in the US for 14 years and things are a little bit different over there. I think Australia is a bit more challenged with, and I think we'll talk about it a bit later, around tall poppy syndrome, but I do feel like there isn't as supportive a culture of people who are out there giving things a crack, male or female, as in other countries. So I was fortunate to get opportunities early, and so I was 35 and had been made vice president of this international organisation. So I was the youngest executive by about 25 years and only female. And so my cohort group were sort of 55, 60-year-old men. And so it started with a lot of hazing. So in these days we'd call it sexual harassment. But back in those days it was, I had to either find a way to cope with it, as opposed to sort of throwing up my hands and saying, why are you treating me like this? And so I made the decision, instead of going down a legal route or whatever, to sort of push it back on them. And so I would play around and kid, never accepting the treatment. Let me be very clear on that. But it was, instead of cowering away from it, I chose to step up to it and call them out on it. And I gained a lot of respect from that. That obviously isn't everybody's comfortable place. Early on, I'm a tall woman, so I'm 5'10" in flat shoes, and so I can be quite intimidating to males and females. And early on, so I would dress down to make my stature smaller. So I'd wear flat shoes. And then around, as I sort of got to know myself better, it was, I'm bringing my strengths to the table. And so it was identifying that. And so now you'll find me and I am often wearing 4-inch heels. And so I'll be walking in and I'm 6'3" into a room. And so, it's just about being who you are and draw what are your strengths. And so I play to that now. As opposed to shying away from it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you've just shared there, not just in a physical, but also in a skills area with minimizing ourselves. We do have that tendency to minimize our presence physically, minimize our presence with our language in the boardroom, how we're presenting. Are we being too forward? Are we being too loud? All these labels that we want to shy away from, and we minimize ourselves. And then how can we put up our hand and ask for a promotion if we've minimized ourselves and our presence, both physically and both in our skills and space? Anita, I'd love to hear your share on how you handle the extra attention.
Sure. Look, much similar to yourself, Allanna, in that I was 27 and in a regional management role. So I had sort of a team of 20 to 30, and I was at least 10, 20, 30 years younger than the other 15 males. And it was just myself that were in that leadership team at that time. I certainly went through a real period of navigating those murky waters of what we were discussing previously about some inappropriate behaviour, etc. I grew up on a cattle farm in the country, so I'm one of 30-odd male cousins and just the one girl. So for me, it was, up in the morning, get out, milk the cows or you don't get breakfast, get on the tractor, do the slashing, go do the burning. So it was just jump in, basically. So I think growing up in a male-dominated sort of environment or industry where you just get in and get things done helped me to understand both ends of the spectrum. But then in that corporate world, it was very much of and I'm the same today, just not putting up with that behavior and standing tall. And I think that's one of the things, like I vividly, Allanna, and I'd forgotten about it till you talked about it now, had dressed down for a period of time. So it'd be like, hair back and don't be so blonde, Anita, and, don't you're so high and and all those things. But now it's like, I'll wear whatever I choose to wear at any time because it makes me feel great. And then I have a great day. And it's about, I think, learning to rise up through those experiences. And there are certainly, as Allanna said, let us be very clear, there are certainly times when you need to raise your hand and you must look after yourself. Building a certain level of resilience. I was often seen as an exceptionally hard manager because I was, the tough female, whereas I wasn't nearly as tough as some of the men that I was managing alongside. But because I was a female, you're sort of expected to have that really soft, empathetic side, which shines through all the time. Another thing I think I learned was just to be selfish with my own time in order to succeed in that leadership role too. So don't be hijacked which can be very easy to do, particularly when you are quite an empathetic person and you want to help others, and you need to really prioritize your time so that you can stay on that path to continual improvement or continuous success. But yeah, similar experiences to you, Allanna. But look, well done, and particularly at being 37 and being a VP, that's incredible. So I was clapping in the background.
Fun times.
Yeah, we can talk about it over.
And some therapy, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you made about where you called it being selfish with your time, and also in acknowledging that sometimes you may have been called tough, even though you have a huge amount of empathy. I know that Brene Brown references that the most compassionate people are people that hold boundaries very well. And so we do need to have that balance again, that balance piece between the balance of holding boundaries, respecting and understanding other people and the situation. And in order to be able to be empathetic, we need to be able to be empathetic for ourselves, because if our energy is drained, if we are continuously giving, we're going to run out. And once we run out of that energy, that's when we can get into a space where we may be behaving in a way that's not aligned with our values. Yeah. So it's much better if we're able to hold the boundaries in a way that is aligned with our values. Mm-hmm. That way, when we are questioned on whether we're being empathetic or whatever label or identity that people believe belongs to us, that we know that we're acting in our values. So I think it's really excellent that you've mentioned there about being willing to be selfish with your time to re-energize you so that you have the ability to give back.
Yeah, you've got to be really conscious of your own battery life, and when that's getting low, it's no different than plugging your phone into a charger. I know that there are some afternoons where it might get to 4 o'clock where I've done a couple of long weeks like you, Allanna, till right 10 o'clock at night or whatever, and it's been great because you've achieved a lot. But then you're like, oh, hang on a minute, if I don't get to a Pilates class or walk my dog or whatever it might be, then I'm not going to be a fun person. I won't be productive the next day either. So be conscious of it. Sometimes it's okay to be selfish because you give a lot as well. So yeah.
Well, I think it's even the transparency around it, and so I think that's something that everybody's learning a bit more around, the value of being transparent, to be able to say, guys, I'm just not myself right now. I'm going to go home and I'll work it out, and I'll be back a bright spark tomorrow, and vice versa. And sort of being able to tune into somebody and go, oh, you're not behaving like yourself right now. Why don't you take off early and go do whatever you need to do? And so I think there's definite strength in being transparent about, all right, how you're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10, and if you're not where you need to be, go out and do something that actually will make you feel better and more aligned again.
I think that's an excellent point, because what you're speaking on there is another space of leadership. You've got to be willing to be the vulnerable one in the first place. You're setting the tone for others that I recognize, I'm self-aware to know that I need the time, and I'm brave enough to have the honest conversation, put up my hand and say, I'm taking this time because I need it. So both of those points are being vulnerable, being self-aware, and being a leader, and setting the tone for others to be able to do that same thing for themselves. So yeah, I really appreciate that point. Thank you. So we look at the next one here, which we're talking about, is imposter syndrome. So that's a boogie lurking in the dark of our own, in our own little minds. And I know, Allanna, you've mentioned before, I've heard you refer to the term coach and critic, or whichever side your coach and critic sits on. And so I want to know, how do you handle that coach and critic and the self-doubts that come out from that?
I think that's actually Anita.
Oh, Anita, sorry.
It was another A one though, so we've got it.
We're just the same person now, Allanna.
Anita, yeah.
Happy to adopt your skill set, trust me. But look, I am such a big one for this, particularly within my own networks. Anybody that works within my team, anyone I come into contact with, the second that they start on that negative talk, I'll call them on it. I'll say, stop. You don't need to be. Stop talking to yourself like that. Let's have a chat about what the issue is and work on a solution, and get you focused on that positive talk. So For myself, whenever I start to get that little negative voice happening, you got to just tell it to stop, basically. Like, it's just got to tell it to, you know what, up. But am I allowed to swear on these things? You've got to be really firm with yourself, and exactly as Allanna said before, that I had that written down in my notes, it's you would never speak that way to somebody that you love, or a colleague, or anybody. You would not. So do not do it to yourself. To tear yourself down, it's too difficult to then get back up. So stay strong. Make sure that you do things that really inspire yourself, inspire creativity and that positivity as well. That's why I exercise. That's why I crazily decided to go back to dancing after 15 years. No, maybe 18 years of not doing it. I was thinking now to just be like riding a horse. I can do that because it's, you know, it brings me alive. I enjoy doing it. It was somewhat more challenging than that. But anyway, my point is that if there's things that you love and things that bring you happiness and that make you shine, then do them more, because that will help to minimize that negative talk. But just tell it to stop if it's not, because it's not okay.
Yeah.
I think it's something that will happen throughout your career, potentially. So I think it's one, get comfortable with it, to say, you know, I think even now, and I'm a good number of years in, I will still at times look around and think, oh, somebody's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, what are you doing here? Get out. You're, you know, the little girls' table's down the street. And so I think it's just acknowledging that and saying, okay, you know, that one's back. That's what that is. Call it out and say, oh, I'm not feeling as comfortable as I would like. So what can I do about that? So oftentimes it is, all right, I've got to get in and read some positive articles. I've got to learn something new. I need to step up my own game. So oftentimes it'll just be, oh, I'm just a bit comfortable here. Therefore, I think somebody's going to rip it away. And so I push myself before somebody else can. And that's how I sort of take control of that, to say, and oftentimes we talk about change, that people don't resist change, they resist change being imposed upon them. And so rather than waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder, I'm constantly out there saying, all right, how do I make myself better and more effective, and how am I continuously learning, so that I'm comfortable in myself that I should be there.
I really love that. There's 2 points that you made there, and one of them was with the skill set and constantly growing yourself, and obviously also the autonomy that you're choosing that change. With the skill sets, I've heard Esther Perel and Adam Grant in a podcast, they mentioned about where trust comes, and I guess it's trust in yourself that you do belong there. And they say it comes from 3 spaces, and the first being capability. Do you have the skill sets to be there? Second being benevolence. What is your intent? Why do you want to be there? Is it for a positive reason? Is it your purpose is for good cause? And the third reason is integrity. So these are the 3 components of trust. And you excellently just identified there that, do I belong here? Well, does it meet these 3 conditions? Do I have the right intent? Am I going to be integral in my actions? And do I have the skills? And if not, then I'm going to upskill so I do believe that I belong here. Remind yourself that you do have the skills, and if you don't, upskill so that you do belong.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And the studies are showing, even with job applications as an example, that when men read criteria in a job application, they will apply for something if they meet 60% of it, whereas women feel like they won't apply unless they meet 100% of it.
Yeah, unrealistic standard in itself right there.
Yeah, and so we're applying for 20% less opportunities than our male counterparts. But we're not trees, so we can evolve, we can move, we can change. So instead of sort of sitting back and going, woe is us, how do we take charge of that and say, all right, no, I now know that statistic, so let me go through in the cold light of day and say, all right, I meet 6 out of 10. My male counterpart would apply for it. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so
hat in the ring.
how do you bolster yourself up and give yourself the self-talk, or get mentors that will actually help you and force you into it and say, no, you could do that with your eyes closed, and just sort of push your way through.
Continue.
Yeah, I love that you've talked there about mentors too, because obviously that's our fifth point there, with setting the stage with female role models, and the fact that, is your mentor necessarily coming from the female space, or is it coming from the male space? But having a mentor in itself is a huge piece. So there's a strategy to setting a stage, and we just talked about women are not comfortable with self-promotion, and earlier we did also speak about the tall poppy syndrome in Australia, and that because of that culture, we'll be cut down at the knees if we do try to self-promote. So having a mentor there, sometimes the mentor isn't just to motivate you and give you the courage to continue, but they may actually be the one putting your name forward for you. So it's really important to have that piece. And, it's really true. Also, we talked about the unrelenting standards, and having that unrelenting standard there and that unrealistic expectation of being 100%. So it can be a real double-edged sword. And I just want to know, what is it that you're doing to make sure you've got a balance there and achieving that in lightness with having a mentor, getting them from yourself, Allanna, you mentioned you were 37, you're the only female there. Chances were there wasn't a lot of female role models for you to look up to. Where did you get your mentor from?
And I would say you probably need more than one. And so for me, there's things that I look for from mentors, and you're not necessarily, just like we're not going to be solving everything for everybody, a mentor can't be everything for you as well. So I think it's important to get well-rounded mentors. So I actually have mentors on this phone, both male and female, that I've worked with before, that I continue to learn and be mentored by. And so I think it's, whether it's formal or not, if we're open to learning something from everybody we come across, that's sometimes enough to go, what do I like about that person? All right, how do I grow that in myself instead of being jealous of it? And so I think it's that acknowledgement of that. Throughout my career, I would say I've had probably 90% males have been my mentors. So I've been very, very fortunate to have people who have always pushed me beyond what I thought I was capable of, and continue to do so. So I'm extremely fortunate to have been surrounded by fabulous people, men and women.
And that potentially, like you say, put your hat on your ring for you.
100%.
And what about yourself, Anita? When's an experience that you can reference, either a mentor or somebody else that was an advocate for you and helped promote you forward?
I think at one point in my career, when I was offered a role sort of at GM level, and I thought, I can't do that. No. I'm not sure that I'm up to that task. And for exactly as Allanna was saying before, I have two different mentors in particular that I have had by my side, gratefully, over the past 10 years, in addition to just daily conversations with people, rightfully so, as you pointed out. Every single person we can learn something from. And I love walking away from a conversation with someone. It happened a couple of days ago at the bakery. I bumped into a woman who used to take my Pilates classes many moons ago, and she's a HR consultant. And through that, I picked up a business lead and ran with that. And then in return, helped connect her with somebody else, which will help with her own health and well-being, etc. So it's just opportunities continuing daily to grow and learn from each other. But stepping back, when I was offered that promotional role, I was talking to both my mentors, and I said, look, I've been offered this opportunity, but I feel like I'm suffering from that whole imposter syndrome at the moment, where I'm not sure if I'm up to the task. I'm excited about it and I'd love to do it, and I do know that I've got strengths here and here, and them reinforcing what they'd witnessed in my working style and capability over the past 15 to 20 years was really helpful in making an informed decision in that process, and then taking on the challenge. So it's definitely great to have people there that you can lean on. It might be somebody in your friends network. It might not necessarily be anyone you've worked with before. As Allanna said, they don't have to be a formal mentor. it might just be a personal relationship. But it is important to reach out if you're ever feeling in doubt or just needing to lean on somebody for certain decisions. But yeah, I think the more that we support each other collectively, male, female, yeah, we're gonna have a great year ahead. But yeah, all for the support.
I think you also shared a great point there, was about the fact that when you're getting the, whether it be a formal or not mentor, you're getting an external viewpoint, which means that you can really pull yourself out of that echo chamber. So yeah, it's important to get those alternate perspectives so that we can expand our own thoughts.
And I've heard a fabulous term which I love, which is the reverse mentoring. And so it's actually getting somebody of a younger age than you, from a different generation, and the value that they can provide in fresh thinking and fresh ideas as well. And so it's not just, it's, to me, mentoring's up, down and sideways.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. Yeah, definitely where you can, because everybody has something different, a unique skill set to offer. So it's not just about the knowledge and experience from that higher space, but what other people can offer from other positions. So yeah, excellent. All right, so we probably won't have time to go over everything in this slide because we have spent a lot more time on the other piece, but I think it was really valuable that we did that. So just as a little bit of a helicopter ride over what we're looking at here is the equality, and what we're asking for is equality, but that means that we need to also be delivering equality ourselves. So we want to look at these considerations from both sides of the fence, and we want to consider it in the three spaces of the environment that we're in. So we've mentioned already about juggling family and work responsibilities, managing change and transitions, which everybody is managing right now. The team space, the workplace relations, the assumed roles and expectations, and how the stereotypes affect everybody in our team. So it doesn't just affect females having a stereotype. The stereotypes go both ways, in fact, always. When we're talking about equality, we're talking about diversity for everybody as an individual in our group, and many minorities face it, but even majorities face it. And sometimes even when you're a majority, if the stereotype is there, it may be stronger, because then there's a bigger portion of people that are held to this standard of this behavior, and then you get the vice versa label of being atypical. Everybody else is like this, why aren't you? So, you know, that really plays into this space of equality and considering how those stereotypes affect people. And as an individual, and you've just touched on it there, Allanna, with recognizing our unique individual strengths, where we require support. And the last point that we're talking on here, and this is where I'm going to open it back up, is what we are uncomfortable about giving up. What are the things? We've spoke a little bit about unwanted identities, but what is it that we're uncomfortable to give up? Because when we are wanting to step into these roles of being VP, being a GM, there are a lot of expectations and time that it takes on that. We may have to give up on some things because we simply can't be spinning every single plate. So both of you there, if I throw back on how did you handle some of the things that you had to get comfortable to give up?
It's incredibly difficult, or I personally have found it difficult. The higher, I suppose, I've grown in my role, or the more senior the position that I've stepped into, therefore the more demand, expectation, etc., to let certain things go when I've been used to being the person on top of everything at home, for example. So, you know, I do the lunch boxes the night before, and I've got all that down to a fine art, and you know, and I'm on top of, you know, bills and that and the other things. So when you've got to relinquish that to your partner or to somebody, or outsourcing it, like cleaning your house, for example. If you're in a senior role and you just simply don't have time to do that or mow your lawn, then you outsource it. Then you're like, oh, I should be doing that. Are my neighbors judging me? It's an incredibly difficult shift sometimes. I think, just briefly to reference, I noticed when my daughter first started going to school that some of the parents were, you know, both the husband and wife, or just the wife, you know, them separately, they were lawyers, or, you know, had high profile roles. So the nanny would be doing the drop off and the pickup. and the judgment coming from some of the other parents at the school was quite a shock, I think, to me, because I think, well, whatever works for your household, then no problem. Like, you've got your own everything going on, so however you choose to sort that out and manage it, etc., it's fine, but there can certainly be judgment there. What you were saying before, Sam, sorry, just to jump back, about stereotypes, I really feel very strongly about the pressure that men are under in the workforce as well. Under that stereotype, being expected to be strong and resilient all of the time, so not being able to show that vulnerability and ask for help. In the last webinar, we were speaking about how to raise your hand and raise your point in a meeting, for example, to find your voice. But for men, sometimes it can be quite difficult, and for females as well, to raise our hand to ask for help. You know, I'm not the subject matter expert at X, so I'm going to ask Bob over there. But, oh, if I do that, will that show that I don't have enough experience in that? And then someone's going to, you know, eventually maybe I'll lose my role here and they'll bring somebody in who's more qualified. So it's showing that vulnerability and being transparent, as you were saying before, Allanna, I think is incredibly important. But sorry, I know I went off track a little bit there. I'm just, conscious of that stereotype piece within a workforce, and it's definitely something that we all need to be conscious of as humans, as a collective group, not male or female. But
yeah, I 100% agree with you there. And I think, Allanna, you had some other really important points to share on those pieces as well.
Yeah, so there's actually even an article today around COVID-19 and talking about female leaders, and are they, you know, the female leaders of these countries are having better results than their male counterparts. And it actually isn't true. So there's so many other parts to it to say, all right, they're female leaders in this country, which means that the country's probably more open to diverse thinking in order for them to be elected in the first place. So it's sort of not, it's making sure that we don't jump on the stereotypes and blow them out of proportion. So they're doing a fabulous job, as are many males as well. And so making sure that we really have that holistic view, and it's just coming down to being authentic. So whatever we have the opportunity to add value just from, I picture it, on a conference call, you don't want everybody coming from the same angle. You want everybody to have that diversity of thinking, and that's male, female, race, sexual preference, all of these things. If we can just be good humans and start as that, and start breaking down what the stereotypes are.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, Allanna.
Yeah, I do think it takes all of us to break down those stereotypes. So we probably won't have time to run through questions, but I think that if Jono, I've trusted, has been answering them very well, because I know that Jonathan and Dave and John, all the rest of our team, are aligned with the message that Allanna and Anita and I have all been sharing here today. So I'm sure they've been answering your questions. Any questions that we haven't been able to address, however, we are willing to, as with all other webinars, come back to you via email or whatever method. So reach out to any of us and we're always happy to answer those questions. This webinar itself is being recorded, so will also be shared for follow-up views. And I think as well, Jonathan, you were sharing, because Anita has referenced a few times on our previous webinar and also her article, because the article about managing up, the case is it's a human factor. We all have to manage up, and in order to be able to earn promotions and put ourselves in our career forward, we need to learn how to manage up. So that piece, I think, is a really great article. I believe John has shared that into the chat, as well as the previous webinar that we spoke on that topic, because it's all relevant, it's all interconnected, and it's a skill set that if we can harness and develop within ourselves, we are giving ourselves that opportunity to be able to progress our own career forward. So that's in the chat there. We do have maybe 4 minutes if you wanted. Is there one or two questions, Jonathan, that you do wanted to just quickly touch on?
There's been so much really, really engaging chat within the chat. I think it's hard to narrow down just one question, but there is definitely a point about, and I mentioned it just before about, knowing or understanding where your support network comes from. And it might not be where you initially think it comes from. We've been in so many different teams and seen a lot of different leadership styles. And, again, when we bring back to that imposter syndrome, you turn around and, everyone else thinks you're absolutely smashing it, but you in your own brain are like, I'm falling flat on my face here. It's that critic, right? Turning around, asking the question is so important. And it's something that I've seen Allanna do in the flesh through one-on-one chats with her teams, with us, those sort of things. Goes, hey, I don't think I'm doing very well in these areas. What do you think on a scale of 1 to 10? And we'll go, well, you're hallucinating because you're a 9 here and 8 here. You're a 3 or a 4 here, but you're still better than 97% of other people who are sitting at 1. But knowing where your support comes from and being able to trust that network is so important. I'd love to hear your opinions on your networks and your support teams.
I think continually developing your networks is incredibly important. Don't ever rest on your laurels at work or outside of work. Be curious all the time about what's happening in your industry, in the country, globally, etc. As Allanna was saying before, continually staying focused on learning and pushing ourselves rather than waiting to be pushed. Networking is something I'm hugely passionate about. I just love conversations with people. I think, why would anyone not want to have a chat? There's always something that we can learn off from the other person or vice versa, or add value. Be continually curious and persistent in terms of growing those networks. I think one of the boss types I'd mentioned in that article was somebody that was like your best friend, that's a very close person to you. Don't rely on them to be your only advocate or spokesperson. Make sure that you focus on other relationships within your business as well, so that you've got collectively a good group of supporters there in case that person moves on, because everybody makes their own way in life and has their own journey. So don't ever think that your manager's going to be there forever. Sorry, Allanna, over to you. The newsroom.
Yeah.
And the weather today, no.
And I would say when you get in a position that you can help others, lean down and help somebody else up. That's the big thing for me is, you'll see fabulous people in your team who haven't been given opportunities to shine. And so it's identify some of those and give them opportunities that they didn't even realise that they wanted or needed, so that they can flourish. And I think that's, if we can all do that, the world will be a better place.
Yeah, it's
100%.
absolutely magic to see the impact that you've had on somebody else's happiness. It's just an incredible feeling. So, yeah, absolutely.
Paying it forward, that we said about before. I think also to wrap up here now, because we have met 2:00, I think just when you were just sharing there, Jonathan, when you mentioned about looking at it as a scale, and I believe that's actually a tool of Allanna's, a scale of 1 to 10, in this space, what am I? In that space, what am I? What I love about that is it actually helps to remove the emotion from it, because we can get quite emotional about this, especially if our critic's been on our shoulder. Putting those tangible numbers onto it helps us to look at it from a rational perspective rather than from the emotional perspective, and helps us reframe and be able to move forward with that. So I think that's a really excellent tool that Jonathan, you've brought up there, that Allanna I know uses. And so just wanting to say thank you to everybody here on the call. Thank you, Anita, Allanna. Thank you to my team, Jono, Dave, John Kay, everybody there for all of the support and help to get this webinar going. And thank you to all the participants who have joined us here today, participated with your questions, and just giving your time over. And the one thing I just want to sign off on is a point that I was meant to say at the start, was about how Obama, when he stood on stage, and it was a joke that we loved, is that when he stood up, he said, to introduce Oprah and to introduce Michelle, he said, everybody here in the audience today, you probably know me as Michelle's husband. It's been 8 years since I held the title, and I'm a little bit grayer, but this is what a feminist looks like. And I love that line. Jonathan loved that line. We all do. It's true that you know, feminists can come in all shapes and sizes, and everybody is working together on this team journey to try and create that change for the diversity and equality piece. So thank you to everybody here today. We'll record this and we'll upload it onto our website ready for next week.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.